This week's show brought to you by the NBA Game Time app. Even LeBron James loves it. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek show. Can you tell it is the middle of the offseason still? And even though preseason is on and the NBA will be back soon, we're still not quite on our game, but we're getting there. So anyway, this week's show is going to be what I call a chef's night. So I'm your host, Dre Alvarez. Patrick Minton on Twitter, NBA Geek, is back. So Patrick and I are just going to bounce some, random ideas off our head, and we haven't really thought this out. So you may be able to consider this, podcasting improv. And I know how excited people are about watching improv shows. So stick around if you feel so inclined. And as always, excuse me, we are produced by our own voice of God, Brian Foster. You can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. So I messed this up. Patrick, I didn't give you an easy segue in. Patrick, say hey.
Hey, how's it going?
And then Brian, say hey.
What's going on, Dre? And yeah, since this is improv night, I guess, if there's Twitch channel chatters, they can send us stuff and we'll just do it on stage. That's how improv works, right? And actually, even though I was complaining about how out of it I am tonight, I am the opposite of you, Dre. I am super hyped for NBA preseason. The NBA is back. I'm wearing my Run TMC Warriors throwback shirt to celebrate the Warriors' alternate Run TMC jerseys they're going to be with this year from the mid-'80s. And, man, that's when I started watching basketball, so I'm hyped for the NBA season.
Fair and no. It's not that I'm not excited about the NBA. It's just kind of – it's like when you go to a movie and the previews start. I mean, it means the movie's about to start, but there's nothing like intrinsically excited about that. Let's go with the first topic. I'll actually steal yours, Brian, so we can get this out of the way, even though pre-show I was very much against it. There was a Waj, I'm going to put this in quotes, bomb, about how there might be some news with the CBA in the future. So the good news, the reason you were excited about this is it looks like there may not be a lockout. It looks like the NBA and the NBA Players Association may just get this worked out, boom, 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 super quick, and we go. That's why you were excited. The reason I'm not excited is this is kind of the general problem with the 24-hour news cycle with Adrian Wojnarowski in general. He's blocked me on Twitter. I assume it's because of an article I did about him from Kevin
Draper, yeah. He wrote
a while
the
back. I almost said
piece.
Pelt. But, basically where he points out that Woj just scoops these stories through kind of some iffy means. And it doesn't really matter, right? Telling me that Dwight Howard is going to the Rockets 10 minutes before Dwight Howard announces he's going to the Rockets doesn't really add any value. And the same thing here. The reason I'm not excited is you're saying there will be news in the future and it could be good. Fantastic. When that news drops, that's huge news. But I think it's, more indicative of the general up-to-the-minute news that doesn't matter. Patrick, any thoughts on that?
I think that's kind of true. I mean, there is some news like at the trade deadline where it really feels like knowing 5 minutes earlier is like the best thing, right? Because you're sitting there glued to Twitter waiting for things to happen. So finding out 5 minutes earlier is a big deal.
The draft is the funniest one, right? You hear like
the draft is hilarious because really, I mean, you don't need to know. Like you're gonna find out in a minute anyway, right? I mean, it's the thing that's pretty telling to me about the draft is like the fact that he announces them often like 2 or 3 rounds before the pick is tells you that a lot of teams aren't really waiting until the last minute and using all the available information to make their choices.
Which is fine. I mean,
I don't think that's fine at all. If you have the 7th pick and you have decided after the number 4 pick goes, that's terrible, right? Because the difference between like there's a guy at number 5 that you might want, right? That if he slips, right?
Well, I mean, if any of us did it, we would do what people have mentioned before, the draft board, where I think we would have it in order. Here's who we want, highest to lowest priority. I think what makes us a little different, though, is in general, I think, especially you've said this like about the 76ers. Actually, I think gives me another topic we'll bring up next. The 76ers, you pick who's best because you're not good enough to start worrying about, well, I really need a point guard. And even then, you don't go to the draft to, do your shopping. So us, it would be easy because we would just have a list of our top 30 players for the first round.
Except that it does matter like what the other guys want, right?
How so?
Well, because if there's a guy is better than three other players on the board, but there are four teams that all want one of those
We're
players.
talking game theory more than analytics,
but
right,
I'm just
Patrick?
saying. Oh, I see what you're saying. So like but usually teams aren't in the position where they have like 2 or 3 first round picks and they have to worry about four
No,
people.
no. What I'm saying is, so this is akin to this is really game theory, right? Because this is akin to
Yeah.
say you think the best guy on the board is what's the name of the guy who went undrafted, who you were championing for this year round? The guy who played at Gonzaga with or wait, was it Gonzaga or was like San Francisco
There's a few
University
guys.
or
One
something?
of them was Thomas
University of San
Walkup.
Francisco. Thomas Walkup, right?
Yeah.
So you think he's the best guy in the draft, but you'd be crazy to draft him number one because his value to other teams is nowhere near that. So what you really would do if you had, like, say, the number 10 pick is draft somebody who everyone else wants and then trade him for a bunch of pieces and Thomas Walkup.
Oh,
right?
fair enough. And to your point, like also if you have 2 picks, you can get you said Walkup. That's an awesome name, by the way. You can get him with your second round pick or possibly even undrafted.
Has he signed anywhere? Brian,
he was on the Warriors Summer League team, but they didn't invite him to camp, so I was really disappointed. But who knows? I mean, maybe he seems like a big athletic guard who like puts up triple doubles, but I don't know. He didn't make it.
but so anyway, we got a little off.
Hopefully there was someone else in the NBA like that who was big and athletic and put up triple doubles. Who would that be?
Yeah, I think he's 6'5", just like Westbrook. Yeah.
Whenever I say he's 6'5", people on Twitter go start yelling at me and telling me he's 6'3". I'm like, I don't give a fuck what it says on the sheet. He is
by the way, Wikipedia apparently has split the difference, Patrick, and it claims that he is 6'4", and they claim that he is on the Chicago Bulls.
Ooh. I'll be waiting for the Woj bomb.
Okay.
So, okay, Dre, getting back to this, I hear you on this. Like, it's kind of ridiculous where we are with social media and news dropping, but here's why I was so intrigued by this is like the exact opposite of the story about a story I was expecting to see. I was thinking like there's 100% going to be a work stoppage. There's going to be a huge gulf in what people thought the BRI should be. And maybe that, like you're saying, maybe that's still true, but the fact that it's even rumored they're going to get a deal done is just, I was shocked to see that. Michelle Roberts is in there, right? She's not going to let them get walked over like they did in the last agreement. But okay, so let me read a couple of the quotes from here. We were showing the article, but from the onset of the talks, there's been a spirit of cooperation between Silver and Roberts, largely reflecting a strong economic times of the NBA. The agreement will eliminate the possibility of work stoppage, and among the expected changes, the new CBA, significantly higher rookie scale contract and two-way contracts between the NBA and the NBA D-League that will add playing jobs for the union. So I guess they're just making so much money now, like we've been talking about. They're starting to reach baseball's revenue levels that the billionaires just aren't being greedy for once. Like, is that what's going on here? That I was surprised. That's all.
It could be, and also what's also worth noting, and this goes back to the Kevin Draper piece I listed a while ago. Waj is never going to unblock me, so let's just keep going down this rabbit hole. He's had a lot of incentive to basically give stories favorable positioning. So that's what also makes this hard. Whenever you see Wojnarowski say something, yes, it's a scoop, but he's also had a lot of incentive to lay the groundwork for positive sources for himself. And then additionally what people don't tend to notice about Wojnarowski is for all the scoops he gets 100% right because he's talking to an agent. He's had speculation, about where LeBron James or other players are going to end up that no one brings up. Wojnarowski, I kind of put in that field. Let's just keep knocking on names as like Nate Silver, where everybody remembers the good stuff they do and they seem to forget the bad stuff they do. So even this piece, until it's a little more concrete, that there is nothing to me that doesn't just say Wojnarowski has a contact in the NBA that has given him favorable information, and that this person's like, hey, we'd really like you to get that, because don't forget, news feeds on itself. Agents in the NBA do use social media and stuff to start getting teams talking, because if people are talking about so-and-so is going to go to this team, it can potentially help bargaining. So that's kind of my issue. It's too far out in the future. It's not enough concrete, and there is a possibility that there is an incentive to be laying the news that it's favorable, because that could potentially, that could put the players league at a disadvantage, right? If Wojnarowski drops favorable terms looking up, and then, as you said, Michelle Roberts comes out and says, no, we're not close. Now the Players Association looks like the bad guy because Wojnarowski said 3 weeks ago things were looking hunky-dory. So clearly it's Michelle Roberts' fault. So, these are conspiracy theories, and I don't want to turn into that podcast. The better way of phrasing it is we are too far away from the news being concrete to know, and that makes a lot of this speculation, and there's enough of the stuff I've seen before where I'm going, there are too many strings attached to this for me to take it at face value.
Fair enough.
Patrick didn't jump in, so I'm going to just go. I'm going to actually.
Usually you're just talking sense, so I don't really feel like any.
But I'm going to cheat and take your topic, Patrick, because I said chef show where we bounce topics back and forth. I'll give you a shot. There is one piece of news we didn't put on the script that is huge, and I'm surprised none of us brought it up, but I guess we were all asleep this week. Ben Simmons injured his foot and is going to be out for months at minimum. And his agent is potentially even saying, hey, he's not in any hurry to rush back. He's not going to.
Why would he be? No.
100%. I mean, it's Ben Simmons it looked like kind of jostling to get to the Lakers preseason, before the draft. And clearly that didn't happen. But so, he's not in any incentive to help out the 76ers, especially since, without Ben Simmons, odds are they're after 2-3 months, they're not even going to have a shot at the playoffs. This is kind of amazing from the 76ers perspective, the number of injuries they've had to young players. That being said, they targeted Noel. Noel had injury that was why draft stock dropped. He had some injury problem.
In that case, they were just saying, okay, we know he's injured, but we can wait a year, right? And in general, from a health perspective, he's worked out fine. Like, we could talk about his basketball performance and the bumps there, but from a health perspective, he's mostly worked out fine. If you subtract the fact that they weren't planning on playing him that first year anyway, that was part of that's what they bargained with anyway. Embiid has obviously been just devastatingly slow to arrive, and the Ben Simmons thing is just freakish bad luck. From what I
although one thing that kind of bugs me a little bit about this is that I feel it's going to give people an out because it is entirely possible that Ben Simmons would have come in and been absolutely amazing. But it's just worth noting that even, I would say, Karl Anthony Towns is an example of this. Even in the best case scenario for a rookie, we thought Karl Anthony Towns was amazing. We thought his last month in the NBA, he was, probably the best center in the NBA and really could have helped the team in the playoffs instead of.
He was, in my opinion, the best rookie since Shaq.
Wow.
I would say since Chris Paul, but yeah, if you're
forgot about Chris Paul, but I'm thinking big men here.
Yeah, right? Yeah, okay. Best big. Oh, absolutely. But what I was going to say is that's the absolute best case scenario, and even then, he had some down months, whatever.
Yeah, but if you look at his third and fourth months, it's he kind of hit a bit of a wall and was struggling with a lot of stuff, right?
Oh, absolutely. And all I'm saying is that's the best case scenario. You basically could maybe get a player that's worth. What was I see Brian's getting it up. What was Karl Anthony Towns worth in terms of wins according to our numbers? I think 8 or 9 this year, something like that. Mm-hmm. That's the best case scenario. Ben Simmons likely isn't going to be worth that, but it's going to let people have an excuse because, if the 76ers go on to win 25 games this season and people go, the loss of Ben Simmons hit him, Ben Simmons wasn't worth 20 wins. It's possible he might have been.
Let's say he's as good as Karl Anthony Towns, but then you reckon, okay, but somebody else would have played in his place, and that person probably would have produced 2 or 3 wins, right? So you're really talking about a plus of 5 wins, right?
Yeah, so it's going to give people an out, and in general, the 76ers, I think we've mentioned this. I'm kind of skeptical as to why he's doing this. Sam Hinkie is following myself and Dave Barry. Is he following you, Patrick?
No, at least I don't think so.
What the hell? I don't know why you get because you're the one who's
why don't I get the credit? I met the man. I shook the man's hand at Sloan.
You recognize him. The story we have is I didn't recognize him, but no, Sam Hinkie's following us. But I'm a little skeptical because I don't think he's following us because he thinks our news is good. I think he's following us because he's.
He does follow me.
Oh, there you go. So I'm a little.
Wait, why don't you think he follows us?
Oh no, he does. I'm saying I'm a little trepidatious. That's one where I'm like, we've been critical of you. Dave Barry has been highly critical of you. Now you're following us. I don't feel you're necessarily following us for you think our news is good. I think it's a follow to maybe rub our nose in something at some point, maybe.
He doesn't seem like a big ego guy to me.
He doesn't strike me as that type of guy. He actually strikes me as the type of guy who's totally going to listen to criticism if it comes from a place that he thinks is constructive and has merit. Obviously, he's not going to follow some dumbass trolls on Twitter, right? But and though I've been critical of him, it's mostly been of the sort where I'd say, well, what you're doing is really interesting, but you could also, in addition to all this, like, it's not necessary. In addition to all this, you could also be gobbling up undervalued players like Jay Crowder. And I don't mean like now Jay Crowder. I mean like 3 years ago when nobody was looking at Jay Crowder, and those kinds of things. Like, and it's clear that he never even attempted to do that. And I'm not saying that he's an idiot for not doing that because it was clearly part of his plan. But my criticism was always like, it's the plan, the giant process, as it isn't quite necessary. It's not necessary to go that extreme. At the same time, I do think people who, like you and Dave, who have said the process is stupid, are like, well, the process is finished. Right? We're waiting on the process. And we can have arguments all day long about where, okay, the process is unnecessary because you can go out and hire pretty good players for a cheap price because the NBA doesn't value them correctly. And I'll say thumbs up. I totally agree. But I do think it's way too early to say, hey, the process is silly.
See, that's where I disagree. And this is where I actually capitulated to Dave, because you kind of said you and Dave. And so what happened is when the 76ers, when Hinkie took over and started doing the process of, rebuilding, we were originally like, amazing, you're shedding all your bad assets. That's step one. Because I feel a lot of teams do end up the fucking treadmill. You got me cussing. All right.
Yeah.
The stupid treadmill memes in the NBA of the treadmill mediocrity. One of the treadmills that does exist is if I have a bad contract, and instead of just waiting for it to expire or buying the player out a la Josh Smith in Detroit, if I trade that player, usually the team that trades me for it is like, I'm not going to just take Andrea Bargnani. I'm going to give you a bad contract in return. And the reason I'm willing to give up this bad contract is it's cheaper than Andrea Bargnani, but it's 2 years longer than his. So, what teams will do is they have a bad contract. Yeah. They hold on to this they trade this bad contract. They get a better bad contract for whatever that means, but then they're stuck with that. And that keeps them on this treadmill. I'll use that term. Right. So the 76ers jettisoned all of their bad contracts. And we were really excited about that. That was like year 1 and 2. And then we were really excited about how they were gaming the draft and picking up free draft picks, waiting for stupid teams like the Kings that were like, we're going to sign a star, so we'll free up cap space. And they're like, you're not signing a star. We were excited about that. But the point that I had, and where we kind of finally, I don't want to say gave up, but started being critical, is it's like, by year 3, if you're not making free agent moves, and unfortunately in the NBA, at least how the market is currently built, you have to go through free agency for at least, I would argue at least 50% of your players, especially the productive ones. That's where we kind of got on, against it. And the 76ers, even this offseason, but to be fair, it's not Hinkie anymore. So we have no idea.
Oh, no. So that's the other thing. I want to, like, when the Sixers parted ways with Sam Hinkie, I thought, okay, regardless of what you think of the process, somehow your team is in a fantastic place now where you got 1 million draft picks and a bunch of prospects. You have the cleanest of clean slates ever. Like, if you were, let's be honest,
going into the biggest, biggest market cap area.
This is my argument that maybe the process is totally was a great idea. Is imagine you were a guy who has a couple $1 billion sitting around and you want to buy an NBA team, and now obviously you'd want to buy the Lakers if you can, but you can't buy the Lakers because the Lakers are worth $15 billion probably, right? But the point is, if you're some rich guy who wants to get in the NBA, what kind of team do you want to buy? And the answer is 100% a team like the Philadelphia 76ers, a team with a totally blank slate, bunch of prospects, bunch of draft picks. You can march right on in.
Also good stress there and a good media. Yeah, thanks, Brian. You got.
It's the perfect situation for buyers. So, as the current owners of the Philadelphia 76ers, you have to ask yourself, what better job could Sam Hinkie have possibly done? Because the way he has upped the value of my franchise, if I'm looking to sell, it's through the roof, right? I mean, it's got to be, or it was until Colangelo took over, the place with by far the most attraction for an outside buyer. And so if we're only talking about increasing shareholder value, he did a fantastic job of that. And that's, I mean, obviously another way to do this is to build an incredibly great winning culture. That's another way to sell a franchise, but you usually can't do that in 3 years.
But one thing, well, I sort of disagree with that. But one other piece of news, because I'll immediately backtrack, Patrick. I came out swinging, and I'll backtrack. One thing that I didn't really take into account is the CBA boost. What we saw in this last offseason was, on the one hand, we're like, why aren't you moving? Why aren't you moving? Why aren't you moving? But in terms of a blank slate, he walked into the largest, the largest salary cap teams have ever been allowed to have. He basically cleared the books for that season. So it's entirely possible that last season, we don't know. Like, I would, if we, he follows us, so maybe we can get him on the show sometime. We could say,
we could try.
we could argue, I'm speaking for him. I'm already doing what I did in the last segment where I'm just making shit up. So I guess this is very much a pundit show, I guess. It's election season. But I was going to say, it's entirely possible that Hinkie said, in a normal year 1, I clear the books. Year 2, I acquire cap space. Year 3, I spend all the money. And that's not what happened. He had year 1, he clears the books. Year 2, he acquires cap space. Year 3, he stands pat and acquires more draft picks.
But to be fair, years 1 and years 2 didn't go the way they would normally go, right? Because if it normally goes year 1, blah, year 2, Joel Embiid comes in and Nerlens Noel gets healthy, etc., right? I mean, the whole bit with Embiid was not clear.
We've argued this before, and I think those went normal. But I'm saying year 3, the reason he might have stalled year 3 was he was going, hey, look, at next year, we're going to have an explosion of salary caps. We are going to have teams acting the stupidest they've ever acted. next, and it's true. Look at how many bad deals happened.
Yeah.
He was like, next season is probably our best bet to jostle a star free and do possibly, the big 3. Next season is our best bet to sign like 3 big name free agents. I mean, imagine if he'd got, this is pipe dream, and I'm making it up because I don't have numbers in front of me for better names. But imagine if he'd grabbed like Whiteside, Durant, and fill in the blank with a third. Like that, it's a long shot, but that was the best bet he had was last season. So it's entirely possible the CBA expanding is why I'm being critical, because he might have said, in a normal situation, I'm going to move in year 2, but I'm going to wait year 3 because year 4 has this situation we have never seen in the NBA. So I guess I'm being very much an economist. I'm being on the both hands.
Yeah. Well, I think another thing to point out here too is you also have the scenario where year 4, I guess, is the year that Dario Saric also comes over, right?
Is that right? And you've been in love with that guy, right?
Well, in love with. I mean, he looks like an amazing prospect, right? I mean, he looks like the best guy in Europe.
Embiid looks great in the preseason.
That doesn't always translate, but he kind of gives you that same kind of look that you got from guys like Mirotic and Bjelica, right? Guys that look like they're really going to be solid NBA performers right off the bat, even if they're not. They might not be MVP caliber All-Stars, whatever, but they look like guys that are going to come in and contribute right away. So in to
be fair, he's also he's 22, right? That's the one advantage that you've got.
So I was just like, if none of the crazy injuries had happened, then you could seriously make an argument that this is the year that things explode. This is the year where you hire people, where you buy free agents, where you explode, right? Because if none of those crazy injuries happened, you could potentially totally have been looking at a 25-win team last year, right? Or 20 or 30-win team even, right? Because it's just hard to say, right? And then, of course, there's the fact that Michael Carter, I thought, actually, by the way, the whole Michael Carter-Williams trade was great because it seems like you're flipping jack chairs, but I think it's pretty obvious now that Michael Carter-Williams is not living up to the promise of his first couple weeks in the NBA, right? So he sold on a pretty high note there, I thought.
Yeah, I bring this up all the time and sorry if you hear typing in the background because I'm looking up players. I'm looking up Michael Carter-Williams right now. But I always bring up Linsanity, and, it's worth noting. I just gave a very glowing review to Giannis Antetokounmpo. I think I said that right. But a good point at the end of it, Brian brought this up when I started talking about how high I was on him. It's like, this guy's got 2 good months of amazing play. And the same, Jeremy Lin had a month and a half, and, Michael Carter-Williams had, the very early start. So it's, he looked amazing for that stretch, but then after another season, it was like, well, he's a young point guard with injury concerns that isn't really living up to the hype. And I'm looking at the trade. Let's see. The Milwaukee Bucks, right? Yeah, I mean, this looks pretty good in terms of everything they got. They got Los Angeles' top pick, and I noticed this. Both Michael Carter-Williams and Elfrid Payton. These are two young point guards that look like they had promise, but still haven't really lived up to it. That they traded high on because we've kind of argued this is like the Derek Fisher point from the Lakers of old. While there are point guards like Steph Curry and Chris Paul, and begrudgingly, this hurts me to say it now, Russell Westbrook, and possibly, depending on how it plays out in the future, Giannis Antetokounmpo, most point guards don't really matter. And point guard and shooting guard are the two easiest positions to kind of put an average player at and then try and get a better player bigger. So they've done that. So to their credit, I think you're right. I think they had young point guards with promise that they traded up. And, we just haven't seen the benefits from that yet.
Dre, I've got a couple of loose ends here. So,
all right, what do we got?
Karl Anthony Towns produced 8.9 wins his rookie season, so you were right on the bat there. Slightly higher than Drummond a couple years before. However,
That's playing time, though.
Right. Now, he is the best rookie, actually, since 2011, 2012. The aforementioned Kawhi Leonard produced 9.5 wins his rookie year.
Also limited on rookies, which is funny.
Yeah.
Or minutes, sorry. Also limited on minutes.
In 1,500 minutes, he produced 9.5 wins. That's like
Kawhi
superstar level.
Kawhi was kind of insane, yeah.
So there's been some good rookies, but Karl Anthony Towns has definitely been one of the best.
Okay, so the Karl Anthony Towns loose end. What else?
No, those were it. Leonard and Towns.
That's it. All right. So Patrick, I'll let you finish up on the 76ers. The only rough part I'll say is to Hinkie's point in the process, this just really sucks because it basically is going to stymie everything with the process. And I think Colangelo, we've discussed this a few times before, there is not a worse person to have brought in to take over.
That's kind of what I was getting to is like, even if you thought the process was crazy, it doesn't mean you have to bring in a guy who's just going to nuke everything. Right? It doesn't mean, okay, I don't like how things are going so far, so give me a shotgun so I can shoot my face off. Sounds like a terrible strategy.
And I'm going to get the name. I can't think of the name, so one of you bail me out here. But there is nothing more indicative than it was Ish Smith. Sorry, so I could think of the name. There's nothing more indicative than, your team traded away this guy for a draft pick. And then one of the things they did, I don't recall if Colangelo was actually in charge or if he'd been brought on and it was pretty obvious to everybody he was the new manager, but they were claiming he wasn't. I don't remember at what point, but there's nothing more indicative than basically reversing a move that the former GM did, like verbatim. It wasn't even traded a second round pick for a player like Ish Smith. They traded a second round pick to get back the player that the previous guy had traded away. And, people have been kind of in love because he gets lots of points. But, from our perspective, we're like, no, this guy was horrible. Why would you ever sign this guy?
But now he's in Detroit, right?
So what ended up happening with him? Sorry. 76ers trades are the worst. They're always like 14
Or he may
trades.
have left in free agency. I'm not really sure, right?
This is boring listening. Sorry, it'll take just a second because basketball reference takes a while to load. Anyway, I have no idea. Brian, I'll let you type that loose end. So anyway, just kind of, it's a shame for the 76ers, and it's not going to prove anything, unfortunately, is the end result I have. Or end conclusion, I would say I have.
It looks like Ish Smith is going to start for the Pistons since Reggie Jackson is hurt.
Yeah, that's what I seem to recall hearing.
They signed him. They signed him outright.
Our good friend Ben Gulker is not excited about this.
He shouldn't be. All right. So do you have a topic to add to Chef's Night, Patrick? We've got 15 minutes, so it'll probably be the last topic.
It's tricky to ask me that because we had all these things we were going to talk about, but we aren't because our special guest isn't here. So now I got to think on my feet. But I guess I'd like to talk about Joakim Noah. So
interesting. Okay, so
it was a bit of a thing last week. I don't know if you guys were following it. He basically refused to attend a dinner with a bunch of cadets at West Point because he's a pacifist, and he said basically I'm extremely uncomfortable being around people who will potentially have to kill for a living. And he's just totally uncomfortable. I thought he was actually eloquent with how he talked about it, and I'm sure I'm butchering his sentiments, but he's just really uncomfortable with the idea of kids killing each other, right? Which is essentially, from his perspective and from mine too, obviously, most of the people in the armed forces, especially the ones who are involved or likely to be, at the end of a gun, are kids, right? I mean, the people who are likely to actually get involved in a in a firefight are not going to be my age. They're not going to be in their late 40s. They're probably going to be more likely in their early 20s or even under the age of 20, especially when you're looking at cadets West Point, right? And so he just basically said, I just felt super uncomfortable and didn't want to go to that dinner.
To your point, what's funny is, like, I think you did a pretty decent job summing it up, because I'm reading the same article Brian's got on screen now. It sounded like his point was more like it was uncomfortable for him not to just be in the event, but to, like you were saying, like to have to sit next to someone and go, you're a kid and you're being groomed to go get killed or kill. Yeah. And I don't want to be next to that. Random kind of shout out. Any of you guys watched the show You're the Worst?
I have never watched it.
Never. I really enjoy it. There was actually one of the best episodes of the season was actually about like PTSD and veterans. And I'm amazed because it's a comedy, and it's kind of handled some very serious topics. Season 2, it handled clinical depression. This season, it's apparently looking at veterans. But, it is an interesting one because Noah's kind of like, it's hard for me to sit next to this person and know that they might be killed. So he wasn't even saying like, I'm a pacifist, I don't want to be there because I'm against war. He's like, I don't want to have to sit next to a kid and have to think about the knowledge that kid is going to get shot.
I thought he did a good job of making it clear that he's not like protesting the military or anything, not denigrating people's life choices, just that he couldn't do it. He wasn't comfortable with it, which I think is...
I'll read a quote out of the article that Brian said along so we can stop speaking for him. But he said, it's hard for me a little bit. It's from Noah. I have a lot of respect for the kids who are out here fighting, but it's hard for me to understand why we have to go to war, why kids have to kill kids around the world. So that was kind of the crux of his argument.
And I think actually he goes on to say that it's not that he's anti-troops. He's anti, if anything, he's probably anti-generals or anti-politicians, because what he really is upset about is the troops aren't the ones who decide when to go to war or how to go to war, right? And I've always thought this is like one of those things that always drives me nuts in political conversations. It's okay for me to be vehemently opposed to any particular war and at the same time be supportive of my troops. For instance, I think the Iraq War was a debacle that our country never should have gotten involved. The second Iraq War, especially. I don't have strong feelings about the first one because I think I was a little too young to make judgments. But the Bush Jr. Iraq War was a terrible and, in my opinion, immoral war. But for me, that doesn't mean I'm saying anything terrible about the guys who had to fight there, because that's their job. They are the army. They don't, so there are certainly illegal orders that I would expect a military person to refuse to obey, even though I recognize that might be a hard thing to do. But refusing to go to war in Iraq would not be one of them. Like refusing to go to war where your commander-in-chief has declared war wouldn't be one of those illegal orders. So I wouldn't. I mean, I'm not anti-troops, but I get to have that opinion. I get to say that's a stupid war. That's an immoral war. We shouldn't have fought that war, without denigrating anyone that had the misfortune of having to fight in that war. And I think I think this is what Noah is trying to say, right?
And you brought this up when we did the Kaepernick talk a few weeks ago. It's very funny that people say, I'm honoring the troops by standing for a flag before a game, which is interesting. But, the same people will argue you've got to cut food stamps and government assistance programs. Many of these programs actually help troops, or ignore them on the street. And it's funny, the same thing here, because if you're saying I support the troops, and Noah's saying I support them too, I don't want them to die. So it's interesting to me that there are rules about how you're allowed to support the troops, and for whatever reason, disagreeing with war is sometimes seen as anti-troops, when the argument Noah just made, and I think you're following up on, is maybe I don't want to see this fellow human being, and as Noah keeps describing him, and it is true. I live by a college now, and I've been walking around the summer, and I'm watching kids go back to the dorms, and they are kids. Like, it is funny because you thought of, when I was in college, I thought of myself, I'm finally an adult, right? I've gone to college, and you walk around a college campus. I'm in my 30s. You're older, Patrick, probably not by much, right? Only a couple of years, obviously. You walk around a college campus, like these are freaking children. Like, they're so young. Like, they look so young. So to Noah's point, it's the same thing there. He's like, I do not wish ill on children, and there shouldn't be anything wrong with that.
To me, he just kind of said, oh, go ahead, Patrick.
I was just going to say, I think it fueled a bit of a controversy, but it's interesting that at least my perception of the blowback, if there is any, is that he's not getting nearly as much blowback or criticism as Colin Kaepernick got, even though I feel like Kaepernick made it completely obvious from the beginning that it wasn't about the military in his particular case. So again, it falls under this like sort of purview of performance patriotism that always gets me riled up. Is like, standing for the flag doesn't make you any more or less patriotic than your neighbor, and if you think it does, I'm sorry, I don't think you really understand patriotism. That's not really what it's about.
I'm going to throw out a last thing, and I don't even remember it well enough to throw it out effectively, so I feel bad about this. But like in the Bible, there is a passage where Jesus talks about, he's like, there are the people that are going to say they're pious, and they're not pious because they're standing out. And you're like, if you have to stand, it may be Jesus, it may be who's the guy who wrote all the letters.
Are you talking about the passage where he talks about the people who, when they're sick, they don't like shave and everything like that, whereas the true pious people are the ones who, when they're sick, they shave and they get all dressed up for temple anyway, and so you can't tell they're sick.
Although there's that too. No, there's one that's like you're gonna. Well, I'm butchering this. I'll try and include it for the show notes, Brian. I'll try and look it up. If you can Google this, Brian, if you find this on Google, Brian, you will be the most impressed producer. But his point was, the people that stand out in the corner and yell very loudly, "I am super pious," aren't the people that are super pious. It's the people that actually do the activity. So to the exact same point, I find a lot of the patriotism, a lot of the support, if it's just lip service, it doesn't really count.
Well, so in particular, I've always been deeply suspicious of any person who calls themselves very patriotic and yet won't say anything negative about their country. I think, that's, to me, if you are really a patriot, then you have to actually recognize the things that are wrong, because you have to be passionate about wanting to fix them. That's what makes you a patriot. If you simply blindly think that everything that your country or your military in particular does is good without any criticism whatsoever, I don't consider that patriotic, and I'm extremely, deeply suspicious of people who think that way.
Oh yeah, can't disagree on that. Well, we ended up in the.
I've got one for you, Dre, here. I don't know if this is it, but it's similar.
All right, I'll give you like
7:2:1. Not everyone who says to me, "Lord, Lord," will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. So
don't even try. Though I will say I've come up with conspiracy theories.
I just like to raise my hand and say I don't really think we should be using Bible quotes to make any points.
Yeah, that's why I'm not shocked.
Because I'm not a religious person.
All I've got to know is,
as you can probably tell, based on my intimate lack of knowledge of the Bible.
I'm now chuckling to myself because I've done conspiracy theories and now we've discussed Bible verses. So we're a right-wing talk show now, apparently, Patrick. That's what you were away for a few weeks and everything turned around. I don't know what happened, Patrick. Anyway, that seems like a good note to end on. I will give some kind of previews. Obviously, the season's coming up. You've been talking with Arturo, who did do his over-unders over at Real GM. I'll link that link on the show notes. So you can hear Danny, I think it's Ryalu. I always butcher his last name. But him and Arturo discuss the over-unders over there.
I think it's Danny LaRue, but we'll see.
Danny LaRue.
Yeah.
Muck that up completely. Patrick, you're actually going to Vegas, so we will actually...
Going to Vegas!
We had a kind of a popular set of articles for a few years, and they've been off for a few years, where you made a portfolio in Vegas.
1 year. Followed it. 1 year.
I thought you did 2 years. Am I crazy?
It's only been off for 1 year.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. So it's only been
off. I didn't go to Vegas last year.
All right. So
I'm going to go to Vegas, and what happens in Vegas is going to be published on our website.
Yeah.
And we'll give an update, and then we can see. I think 2 years ago, the last one you did it was the most depressing end of a season where literally, you had 3 finish lines where you're like, surely 1 or 2 of these will cross the finish line and put us in the black.
No, it was a parlay where I had three that came down to the wire, and in order to lose money, I needed the least likely of all 3 to happen. Every other scenario would have won me money.
Exactly.
Damn you, Spurs. Damn you, Spurs.
That's like a crazy parlay.
Did my mic cut out, or did Patrick's cut out?
No, we lost Patrick's audio. He's back. He's back.
That Spurs loss was just the craziest. That put me off gambling for a year. That Spurs loss was just insane.
All right.
And obviously, I know it doesn't come down to that one game because when you make a season-long bet, there were so many other games that factored into your thing that one game isn't what made the difference. And
although,
yet that's fair, the way it feels because you're on that day, and that's how it came down.
Although I will say I've been very anti-season long prediction, and that will still be my thing. Like I'm very excited about this, but my general advice to people is like it's crazy, but like it's really rough when you make a really smart bet like on the Suns. I think it was either that year or the year before, and mid-season you hear blockbuster trade, the Suns trade away their two best point guards, and you're like, what just happened? You're like this is a lock. You're looking.
It was like a lock until that trade. It was the surest thing to a lock as possible until that trade. That was insane.
It was over on the Suns, and I believe they traded Dragic to the Heat for nothing. If I recall,
they traded Dragic, and then like they turned around and traded
Isaiah Thomas.
Was it Isaiah
right?
Thomas?
Yeah, they traded Isaiah Thomas and replaced him with Brandon Knight. It's just like, come on, you're killing me.
All right, so anyway, we'll definitely rehash some of those old. And then the other.
This year, I think we're going to try and tend towards betting on unders because, as we've said in the past, when you bet on an under, in order for the team to beat the under, like a bunch of players have to overperform. Whereas when you bet on an over, a lot of random, like all it takes is a guy to tweak his ankle. Boom. Your over is screwed, right? All it takes is LeBron James saying, "I'm going to sit the next 2 weeks out." Boom, you're over screwed. It's like kind of and if you bet the under, then it's pretty unlikely that the team's like worst player is going to like get injured and then somehow be replaced with an amazing player, because that's why you bet the under in the first place, because there aren't that many amazing players to replace him.
The Knicks under, for instance, in past years has been a good one.
It'll probably be a good one this year. And then we also have some top 10 lists. I'll give you, because we've actually are like halfway through finishing
the Knicks are a special case because even if they are good, the people in Vegas just go nuts on the Knicks, right? So I feel like you could just, if you bet against the Knicks every year, you could probably just make money because the line moves to a crazy point, right?
I want to let you all know that Patrick has a hard stop at 9:30, and I was trying to wind down the show, and I brought up over unders, and we got Patrick going. So anyway, we got that in the works, then we got some top 10 lists, so those will be exciting. We'll get to see those. I'm just going to skip shout-outs since this was a chef show. We'll be back more normal next week. This has been the Boxscore Geeks Show.
Can we sneak in Vin Scully? Shout out
all right,
to him.
Go ahead.
No, that's it. Shout out to Vin Scully.
Vin Scully, last broadcast. Yep. How many years was it?
67 years.
67 years.
Jeez. All right. He's
one of the guys who literally invented broadcasting, so it was great to watch that game. Go ahead, Dre.
So Brian sneaks in the Vin Scully shout out. Absolutely deserved. All right. Well, that's been the Boxscore Geek Show. If you found us not through our website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. You can find us on podcast networks on iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geek Show. Subscribe, upvote us, helps us out. We go live every week. Who knows what day? It'll be more regularly once the NBA season starts, usually around 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers. You missed the live show, you can catch recaps on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I've been your host, Dre Alvarez. You can find me on Twitter as Nerd Numbers. Co-host Patrick Mitten, you can find on Twitter as NBA Geek, and produced by Brian Foster, who you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. Have a good one, and we'll see you next time.